So we have our landscape that we started today, and I'm going to show you how to shade it using only pencil. And so what I've done is I've turned this landscape into a black and white monochromatic image, right? Monochromatic is one color in many different values. And so obviously the color would be black, and it's in gray, all up until it gets to bright white. So the first thing I want to do is, just like we marked out our most basic shapes in this drawing, I want to mark out our most basic values, right? Within all of our components and all of our shapes, right? We have this larger mountain here, which has some dark color and then lighter gray, but I want to block out a general gray for each shape. So I'll start with that larger mountain, and I want to get to a color that looks kind of like this gray here. It's still darker than what this will be, even though we have a lot of dark trees here. We're going to layer those in afterwards. So I'm going to get a nice neutral or darker gray in there, and I'm just going to try to shade as evenly as possible. I'm going to start light. I'm not going to press very hard. I'm just going to go over my pencil marks a lot, and I'm going to put something underneath my paper so that I can not have a texture. Actually, before I go on, here is a value scale. I'd like you guys to practice drawing one of these, whether you do it now or later when we practice this together. A value scale is just drawing a rectangle, making a bunch of boxes, and evenly decreasing or increasing the value from light to dark or dark to light. And it's just a good practice because I want to see all of these grays in my picture, right? A full range of value rather than just one gray and a black and a white. I want to see so many different grays because that is what makes a photo and a picture look real. Lots of different values. So like we talked about in class today, value determines how far or close something is, and of course how light or dark an object is in color. And the difference between value and color is the word hue, H-U-E, that's the type of color, right? So you have red, yellow, blue, all of those. And then you have value, which is the lightness or darkness of any color. So you can have a light red or a dark red, light blue, dark blue, and so on. So again, I'm shading this evenly, nice even. Don't want to see many pencil strokes because I'm going to put texture into it after I shade this in. Notice how I'm going over and over again until it's even and as dark as I want it. And I'm just looking at my photo, making sure that it's dark enough. So after you shade in that value, we're not going to put in any detail yet. We're going to now go into our other shapes and decide, okay, well, how light or how dark should these general shapes be? So this mountain is lighter, right? That's why I turned it black and white so we can see the grays so clearly. On this photo, you can see that it's lighter, but for something like this green versus this orangey green mountain, it's a lot harder to see and determine what's lighter or darker. So that's helpful. So I'm going to go into here and shade. And of course, hopefully you drew these shapes lightly so that these lines will kind of fade into the background and become part of your shading, because my hard outlines will make this drawing look more graphic and flat rather than three-dimensional. So it's best to not have hard outlines when you want to make something look three-dimensional. And then I'm going to go back into this one and add in texture and darker values as well. And then this one will be even a little bit lighter, just a smidge. The next thing I'm going to do is this mountain range here. I would say it's about the same value as this middle mountain. So I'm going to try to match that same value. And pay attention closely that I'm holding my pencil on an angle, not upright like I'd be writing, right? Because my pencil would leave a hard line if I shaded like that. So I'm holding my pencil more parallel to the paper, right? It's going in the same direction, and I'm using the very edge of my pencil because it's a larger surface and it does not leave as thin of a mark. It's more subtle. Okay, now my ocean. This is a little bit tricky, but what we're going to do is shade from the edge of the mountain to like about here is pretty much white, and then it starts to get gray. So I'm going to start shading a little bit further from the base of the mountain, very lightly. It's not dark at all. And I'm going to shade up until this hard line, all the way out to my horizon. And then it kind of gets closer to this mountain over here, this shadow. And it's just slightly darker toward like this line here, because I'm drawing, I guess, something like this wave. I didn't draw them exactly how it is, or maybe this one. And what's going to happen is the white is going to be on the other side of our line, and we'll do the same type of thing where we shade almost up to the line, but not quite. And then we go back to the further line. And you can shade right over those rocks. You can see the ocean gets a lot darker over here, so I'm going to press a little bit harder. And it gets lighter by the line, and then harder by this line over here. And there are some rocks over here that we didn't really add, so I can just draw them in now, and eventually they will be colored in to be darker. Okay. Up in its distance here. Oh, I got a little eraser shaving in here. Okay, well, that's not going away. It's darker up in this corner over here by the mountain. It's kind of the same shade as the mountain, so I'm going to color it darker, and then it starts to fade away, and then it comes back in down here, same value. Notice how my lines are parallel to my horizon line. Remember, because the ocean's water level is pretty much horizontal. It's not very sloped, right? This goes up here this way, but levels out. All these lines pretty much level out. So same thing over here. And same thing in the ocean as with the mountains. We're going to go back in to the ocean in a little bit and add a little bit more detail and texture to the water. So I'm starting to shade it with some pencil strokes showing, just to show some texture in the waves moving. Okay, and then my sky, finally, before we add detail. I'm going to shade in my sky, because the sky, even though it's bright blue, it still has this darker gray value. And so for my clouds, I'm actually going to erase some of the lines of my clouds, because I'm going to shade and fade these clouds into the value of the sky. So I want an outline there, but just to guide myself, but I'm not going to use the outline so much. So I erased a lot of it, and I'm going to go back in, and very lightly you can go past the line in some parts. I'm moving my pencil in this circular pattern to make it look a little bit more fluffy and fun and faded, and I'm not pressing hard at all on my pencil. And maybe I'll add a little bit of white fluff next to my cloud, right? Like it's kind of disintegrating and breaking off. Maybe there's some white up here I'll leave. Maybe there's some white in the sky that I want to leave lighter, right? The sky is darker in this direction because the sun is on this side. So the sky that's farther from the sun is going to be darker in value, right? Even though it's just a plain blue, the sky changes in value wherever you are in the world. It's always going to have a side that's brighter and a side that's darker, as long as the sun is shining that day. And so once you get really good at drawing clouds and you get comfortable, then you can kind of play around with shading inside of the clouds, because if you look closely, the clouds also have shadow within them. They're not just white. And usually those shadows are blue and purple, and so I'm sure if you've seen photos of beautiful cloudy skies, you know what I'm talking about. Or maybe you never noticed before. I encourage you to go look. I'm keeping my pencil very light, airy, as I shade my sky. Okay, so it's okay if I have some texture in there, because there are some like random white clouds that I can sketch around and leave lighter. Okay. Now I'm going to start, I'll just start with this mountain and go forward and then land in the ocean and the rocks. Actually, before I do that, I'll just color all the rocks. We're going to color all the rocks almost black, because the rocks have a little bit of shadow in them. So almost black, and then we're going to add black detail after. By the way, I am using my 6B pencil. It is the metallic one in your kit, and it will be softer and make darker marks. Okay, now I'm going to add some detail here. My mountain range is a little bit darker on the top. Has some interesting gray patterns. A little bit darker over here. Usually, when you look at a mountain range, the tips of the mountains are darker and they fade into a lighter color, and then the next mountain will overlap it and be darker and fade into a lighter color. So, and that's how you see the distinction between mountains when you see like a large range of mountains in the distance. And if you're questioning what that means, just ask me and I can show you next time we're in class. Okay, so I added some detail. Now we're going to move on to the darker one. First, I'm going to darken the area where my trees are, and then I'm going to add some different texture. So I'm going to shade the same way I was shading before, and this just saves me some time and energy rather than making little marks for every single little tree that exists on that mountain. Right, so I'm coloring a larger area over here, kind of comes down in stripes down the side of the mountain, diagonal stripes. On the edge here. And then I'm going to go in with more of a defined pencil tip and just very quickly add in these little pencil strokes to look like trees. They're not very defined at all. I'm using like a thicker part of my pencil so that they're not super thin. And you want to give the edge of the mountain some texture, right? These trees are kind of coming out of the ground and poking into the air. Right? And I'm not going to completely cover this mountain in trees. This has a rock at the end. And same thing all throughout my black stripes that I made. Some trees, right? So if I had left this blank and I had to cover this whole tree or this whole mountain in little trees, that would be so exhausting, and I would not want to do that. So I'm just giving them some edges, giving the mountain some tree-like texture on the top, a little bit in between, in the middle. A little bit in the center, just to make some more darker, defined edges. Scatter some throughout, just so it doesn't look like stripes. And I feel like that's pretty good for that mountain. Now also be careful when you're shading, when you're drawing in pencil, this happens, right? My hand will rub against my pencil and smudge it and taint my white areas. So I'm going to take some of that out. And what I'm going to do is put a white piece of paper under my wrist so that it does not smudge. And I'll use this one right here. Okay, so this is what it looks like. My hand is on the white paper and I'm not smudging. For this mountain, similar thing. Over here, it's kind of some black parts to it. And I'm going to shade some darker areas. When you're shading, it's really smart to shade in the direction that your object is moving in, right? This mountain isn't moving, but where is that shadow going? Like, what direction is that shadow moving in? Or maybe what direction is the grass on the mountain moving in? So those are things to keep in mind as you shade. Now this one's a little bit more complicated, but the key is to just fake it till you make it. Just make it look convincing, right? And I'm gonna get rid of this hard line here, take it away a little bit. Make it look a little bit better. Give it some grass, right? Give that edge some texture. And I'm just putting some grass on the mountain. Really short, sporadic, crazy brush strokes or pencil strokes. And kind of scribbling a little bit. And now when you zoom out, looks like a textured mountain, right? And I could obviously put much more detail into that. I personally am just not a detail-oriented person, so I tend to make things more generic. But as you learn, the more generic you make things, the more interesting it can be, because your mind is just amazing and it can make something out of very little, right? It can imagine what is not there, right? Like, I didn't put every single detail into this mountain, but your mind can kind of imagine what would be there, or piece together the little that you've provided and make something meaningful out of it. So there's your tip for the day. The next thing we're going to do is the front mountain. So to start this hill over here, there's not a lot of darker value. There are some smaller spots of dark over here, and I'm just moving my pencil. I'm flicking it up and down in small areas of condensed line, just to look like grass that is in shadow. And so this whole mountain is kind of filled with grass, and you can fill the whole thing up with texture if you want. But what I'm going to do is just clump it in areas and kind of spread it out, just to give you a sense of that there's grass there. And I'm going to erase some of this hard line. Just so it's softer. And I can even hold my pencil at an angle and make some softer areas of shadow. Right, I can go over some of my grass to make it look more blended in. Kind of just scribbling though. There's no technical way to do this. It's just capturing the texture and the value. So that might look differently for many of you. Just scribbling and trying to make my lines go upright more rather than horizontal, because the grass kind of goes in that direction. Some of them are longer, some shorter. Notice how I'm constantly looking back to my reference image. I always want to see where I need to, or what value I need to put down, because it's going to change from place to place, even if it's ever so slightly. Okay, now I'm going to shade some more broader areas in over my grass. I'm going to darken some of this hill again because there's some darker areas that I kind of missed. I'm just going to put them in. And now when you're coloring this, you would pretty much do the same thing that I'm doing now. You would choose the color that most dominates each shape, and then you would add details later using darker values of the same color or maybe even different colors. Like this mountain, for instance, it's orange and green. So you'd start out with orange and then put green in the shapes that the green belongs, and then you would put darker orange and darker green and so on. So just a very similar process. Shade some in here. There's some looking like rocks over here. I'm going to go into all of my rocks now, and then we can tackle the ocean at last. So my rocks have some black. I'm going to zoom in. And I'll zoom in here. So I'm drawing this rock right here. So it's black shape here and here. And then there's also a little rock behind it that is darker. And so that gives my rock some dimension and interest. There's also a rock over here. Right, I'm just adding some things as I'm coloring. And you don't really have to go exactly by the photo if you, and I say that, but, and I was talking to some girls today, the more you observe and copy from photos, the better you will understand the way light works, the way rocks are formed, the way the water moves and looks, and you'll be able to kind of make things up as you draw. And so that's what good artists do. We start by observing. And so that is what we are doing so that we can become good artists. Zoom over here. And I'll make this rock a little bit longer. And some rocks are just plain black. There's this rock in the distance that's slightly darker than my mountain range, but not quite black. Okay, now I'm going to go into the ocean, and I'll zoom out a little so you can see. Over here it's darker, has some linear pattern. I'm going to put some darker over there, leave some linear texture in the direction that the waves are moving. Right, when you go to the beach and you look at the sand and the waves, you see patterns of lines usually moving toward the ocean or toward yourself, right, going in that direction. So that's what we're trying to create. Just very subtle, not pressing hard, not making dark lines. Just subtle variations of tone and value. So, I mean, I think we're about done. If you want, you can go into the clouds and add in some of that shadow very, very lightly, moving my pencil in a circular motion. Doesn't go right up to the edge, it fades into the center of the cloud. And there's some slight variation here in value, kind of breaks up that misty cloud in my sky. I didn't color over here by accident, so I'm going to fill that in. Right, the things that are closer to you have more detail, so if you want to put some more detail in this hill that's close to you, you can. You can add some thinner grass blades, longer grass blades moving in different directions, darker ones. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave it there. You can probably work on this for hours and hours, but at some point you have to stop. So I'm fairly satisfied. I'm going to leave it as is. And I'd like you guys to try creating a black and white drawing, and then you can try it in color, or you can try your own in color, whatever you prefer. Okay?